I secretly paid my sister's mortgage for years without telling anyone. The night I was rushed to the hospital fighting for my life, she left my 2 kids completely alone. The ambulance came at 11:47 at night. Not because I called it. Because my neighbor Dolores, who was 73 years old and walked her dog at midnight because the dog required it and she had long since stopped arguing with the dog, had seen my kitchen light on an unusual angle through my window and had knocked and had found me on the floor next to the counter where I had been trying to reach my phone and had not made it. Dolores had called 911 and then had stood over me with her hand on my shoulder saying something I could not fully hear, and the something she was saying was probably reassuring, and the hand on my shoulder was definitely reassuring, and I have thought about Dolores many times in the months since that night and what it meant that a 73-year-old woman and her dog were the architecture of my survival. My children were upstairs asleep. Mia was 8 and Noah was 6, and they did not know their mother was on the kitchen floor. They did not know that the woman who had read to them 2 hours earlier and had checked that Noah's night light was on and had reminded Mia that her library book was due Thursday was currently on the floor waiting for an ambulance. They were asleep in the specific complete way that children sleep when they believe they are safe. My husband was in Calgary. A work trip, the 4th that year, a week-long conference that we had planned around carefully because planning around it was what our life required. He had called at 9 to say goodnight, and I had been fine at 9 and not fine approximately 90 minutes later, and the distance between those 2 states had been sudden and total and had not included enough time to call anyone before the floor became my address. In the ambulance I gave them my husband's number and I gave them my sister's number. My sister's name is Vanessa. She lived 14 minutes away. I had timed it once, not for a reason, just the specific knowledge that accumulates when someone you love lives in a place you visit regularly. 14 minutes. She had a key to my house, the physical key on a dedicated keyring that I had given her 3 years prior when Noah was born and the calculus of emergencies had required a specific practical response. She had the key. She had the code to the alarm. She knew where the children's school was and what they ate for breakfast and that Noah needed his inhaler within reach at all times and that Mia slept with the closet light on, not the nightstand lamp, specifically the closet light. She knew all of this because she was in our lives in the specific sustained way of a person who was present, who came to birthdays and school plays and Sunday dinners, who had held both my children in the hospital room hours after they were born. She was not a distant relative or an occasional presence. She was my sister and she was 14 minutes away and I had her number on the form in the ambulance because she was the person you called. My husband reached her before the paramedics had finished with me. He called from Calgary at midnight his time, which was 11 his time and midnight mine, and he told her what Dolores had told him. That I had been found on the floor, that I was in the ambulance, that the children were alone in the house and needed someone there. What happened next is the part I have spent months trying to understand and have not fully understood and may never fully understand in the way you want to understand things that do not have a shape you can hold. Vanessa said she could not come. Not that she was sick. Not that she was in another city. Not that something had happened that made the 14 minutes impossible. She said she could not come, and when my husband, from Calgary, asked why, she said she had an early morning and the children were probably fine and maybe Dolores could stay. Dolores, who was 73 and had a dog and had already done more than she was required to do by finding me on the floor and calling 911 and riding with me to the hospital because no one else was there. My husband called 3 more people from Calgary. Our friend Marcus, who was 40 minutes away and who answered on the first ring and was in his car before my husband finished the sentence. Our neighbor couple, the Okafor family, who were across the street and who sent their @LT daughter Zara over within 7 minutes. Marcus arrived 22 minutes later and stayed until my husband landed the following afternoon on the first available flight. Mia and Noah woke up to Zara sitting in the hallway outside their rooms, which Zara had done specifically because she understood that waking to a stranger in the house was less frightening than waking to an empty one. She had brought her phone with a downloaded movie and she sat in the hallway and she waited, and when Mia woke at 6:30 and came out of her room, Zara was there with the movie and a calm face and the specific competence of someone who understood what the morning required. My children were not alone. Not because Vanessa came. Because Marcus drove 40 minutes at midnight and the Okafors sent their daughter across the street and Dolores stood over me on my kitchen floor with her hand on my shoulder. I was in the hospital for 4 days. A cardiac event, which is the medical language for the thing that puts you on a kitchen floor at 11:47 reaching for your phone. Not a heart at CK in the full technical sense, but close enough to the full technical sense that the cardiologist used the word warning with the specific weight of a person who needed me to understand that the warning was not metaphorical. I was 37 years old and I had received a warning, and the warning required changes, and the changes were significant, and the 4 days in the hospital were the beginning of understanding what significant meant. Vanessa came to the hospital on day 2. Not day 1. Day 2. She arrived in the afternoon with flowers, the specific kind you buy from the hospital gift shop when you have not planned to bring flowers and are buying them on the way in, And she stood in the doorway of my room with the flowers and the expression of someone who understood they were arriving into a situation where the geometry was not in their favor. My husband was in the room. He looked at her and then at me and then back at his phone with the specific careful neutrality of a man who had made 14 phone calls from Calgary at midnight, and had one opinion about the person in the doorway and was choosing not to lead with it. She came in. She set the flowers on the table. She sat in the chair next to the bed. "How are you feeling?" she said. I looked at her. At the face I had known my entire life, the face that had been across from me at every significant table in my memory, the face that had cried when I told her I was pregnant the first time and had been in the room when Mia was born and had held Noah at 3 hours old with the specific careful way of someone who understood they were holding something irreplaceable. "I am alive," I said. Something moved across her face. "Lily." "My name is not in this story," I said. Quietly. Not performing quiet. Actually quiet, the specific register of someone who is 4 days out from a cardiac event, and does not have the energy for volume. "I need you to tell me what happened." She looked at her hands. The hand looking of someone building something honest and uncertain whether honest was survivable. "I froze," she said. "I know how that sounds. I know there is no version of it that is adequate. I froze, and by the time I unfroze, Marcus was already there, and I thought." "You thought the situation was handled," I said. "I know how that sounds," she said again. "I need you to stop telling me you know how it sounds," I said. "I need you to tell me what actually happened. Not the managed version. What happened inside you between the phone call and the decision?" She looked at the window. The specific direction of someone who is not avoiding but is finding the room to say the true thing. What she said next was not what I expected, and I have been sitting with it for months and I still do not know what to do with it completely. She said, "I have been overwhelmed for a long time. Not that night specifically. For a long time. And that night was the night I had nothing left and I made a choice from nothing and the choice was wrong and I have known it was wrong every day since." I looked at her. "Overwhelmed," I said. "The mortgage," she said. Very quietly. And there it was. The mortgage. The thing that had not been named between us since the beginning and that had been in the room at every conversation for 3 years and that we had both been choosing not to look at directly. Let me tell you about the mortgage because it is the architecture of everything that followed, and without it the story does not have its shape. 3 years before the hospital floor I had discovered something that Vanessa had not told me and that I had not been looking for and that had arrived the way significant things sometimes arrive, sideways and without announcement, in the middle of something completely unrelated. I had been helping her sort through paperwork after her divorce. Not her finances specifically, just the accumulated documentation of a marriage that had ended and needed to be organized into the categories of before and after. And in the sorting I had found a notice. The kind that arrives on official letterhead with specific language about timelines and defaults and the legal process that begins when someone has not made a mortgage payment in 4 months. 4 months. Vanessa had not made her mortgage payment in 4 months and she had not told me in the house she lived in, the house that had been part of the divorce settlement, the house her daughter Cora came home to from school, was 4 months away from a process that ended in a specific place. I sat with the notice for a long time. Then I put it down and I asked her about it directly and she told me the full version, the one she had been carrying alone, the specific weight of a financial situation that had collapsed in the aftermath of the divorce and that she had been managing with the specific management style of someone who believes the problem will resolve before anyone has to know about it. The problem had not resolved. I made the payment that week. Not as a loan, not with a conversation about terms and timelines and what she would pay back and when. I just made it. Because the house was where Cora came home from school and because Vanessa was my sister and because the notice on official letterhead had a timeline that did not accommodate a longer conversation. Then I made the following month's payment. And the month after that. Not because she asked me to. Because the situation had a shape and the shape required it, and asking about terms felt like standing in a burning building discussing the fire insurance. I made the payments and I did not make them into a thing between us because the making of them into a thing felt like changing the nature of what we were to each other, and I did not want to change the nature of what we were to each other. I told no one. Not my husband initially, not for the first 4 months, and when I told him it was because the amount had grown to something our finances required him to know about and the telling was practical rather than the unburdening I should have done earlier. He had been quiet with the information in the way he was quiet with significant things, absorbing it and assessing it before responding. He had said, "This needs to have an endpoint." I had said, "I know." It had not had an endpoint. 3 years of payments, monthly, the specific sustained commitment of someone who had made a decision and had not found the moment to unmake it, and Vanessa had received each payment with the specific careful gratitude of someone who understood what they were receiving and could not find the language to address it directly. We had never talked about it. Not once. Not in 3 years of payments. Not in 3 years of Sunday dinners and birthdays and school plays and the specific sustained closeness of two sisters who shared everything except the one significant financial reality sitting under all of it. The silence had been mine to break, and I had not broken it, and she had not broken it, and the silence had accumulated its own weight. She said, in the hospital room on day 2, I have known for 3 years that I owe you something I cannot pay back, and every time I looked at you I felt it, and the feeling has been getting heavier, and the night you needed me the weight was so heavy that I could not move under it. I looked at the hospital ceiling. The specific white of hospital ceilings everywhere. You are telling me, I said slowly, that the reason you could not come to my children at midnight when I was in an ambulance is that you felt guilty about money. I'm telling you what happened, she said. Not defending it. What happened? Guilt immobilized you, I said. Yes, she said. While my 6-year-old was asleep upstairs not knowing his mother was in an ambulance. She closed her eyes. Yes. The room was very quiet. My husband had put his phone down. He was looking at the window with the specific careful neutrality that had shifted into something less neutral. I thought about 3 years of payments. About the decision I had made not to make it a thing between us. About the silence I had chosen because the silence felt like protection and had turned out to be something else. I thought about Dolores and her dog and the hand on my shoulder. I thought about Marcus driving 40 minutes at midnight. I thought about Zara in the hallway outside my children's rooms with a downloaded movie. The payments stop, I said. Vanessa opened her eyes. Whatever the current balance is, whatever is left, I said. I'm going to find out the number, and we are going to have the conversation we should have had 3 years ago, and we are going to establish what you owe and how it gets paid back, and it is going to be written down, and it is going to be formal, and the informality that produced the silence is over. Okay, she said. That is not the harder part, I said. She waited. The harder part is that I need to understand what I am dealing with, I said. Because what happened at midnight is not something I can file as an isolated incident and continue as before. My children were in that house. They were 8 and 6 and they were asleep and they did not know. And the person who had the key and the code in 14 minutes and 3 years of my payments looked at her phone and then decided she had an early morning. I know, she said. You keep saying you know, I said. I need you to tell me something other than that you know. I need you to tell me what changes. She looked at her hands again. The hands that had held Mia in the hospital room hours after she was born. The hands that had held the mortgage notice I had found in the paperwork 3 years ago. I need help, she said. Not money. The other kind. I have not been okay for longer than the 3 years, and I have been managing it the same way I managed the mortgage, alone and in silence and hoping it resolves before anyone has to know. Something shifted in how I was listening. Therapy, she said. I started 2 weeks ago. Not because of this, because this had not happened yet. Because I had finally understood that the weight was not going to lift on its own. She paused. I'm telling you this not as a defense. As information. I looked at my sister. At the full complicated version of her, the one who had held my children and come to every significant occasion and carried a financial shame for 3 years in silence and frozen at midnight when freezing was the worst possible response. All of those things were true simultaneously. The love was real. The failure was real. The weight she had been carrying was real. The consequence of that weight falling on my children was real. I'm glad you started therapy, I said. I know it does not fix midnight, she said. No, I said. It does not fix midnight. My husband left the room at some point and came back with 2 cups of coffee from the machine in the hallway, the specific practical act of a man who understood that the conversation needed to continue and that the continuation required something in people's hands. He set one next to Vanessa without a word and sat back down and returned to his careful neutrality. Vanessa picked up the coffee. Her hands were not steady. What do I need to do, she said. The conversation about the money is first, I said. That happens when I am out of this hospital and in a position to have it properly. My husband is part of that conversation. It happens in full. Okay, she said. The other thing is time, I said. I am not ending this. I am not telling you that midnight was the last thing we are to each other. But I need to see something different before I can hand you the key again. Before I can put your name on the form in an ambulance. She looked at the hospital cup in her hands. How long, she said. I do not know, I said honestly. That is not a punishment with a timeline. It is a real answer. I do not know how long it takes to build a different pattern. I have never done it before. She nodded. The specific nod of someone who has received a hard, honest thing and is not arguing with it. She left an hour later. At the door she turned the way people turn at doors in significant conversations, the specific pause of someone who has one more thing. The payments, she said. What you did for 3 years. I need you to know that I understood what it was. Every month. I understood what you were doing and what it cost, and I was not silent because I did not understand. I was silent because I did not know how to be worthy of it. I looked at her. You did not need to be worthy of it, I said. You needed to talk to me. Those are different things. She left. The financial conversation happened 6 weeks after I came home from the hospital. Formal, as I had said. My husband and I on one side, Vanessa on the other, a document that my husband had drafted that laid out the balance and the repayment structure and the timeline. Vanessa had not argued with any of it. She had read it carefully and signed it and taken her copy and folded it into her bag with the specific care of someone treating a document as the thing it was. After she left, my husband sat at the kitchen table and said, "How do you feel?" Like something that was underground is above ground, I said. Like it can be looked at now. Is that better? He said. Yes, I said. It is better. Not easier. Better. The months since have had a specific texture I did not expect. Vanessa is in therapy. She calls on Thursdays, which is not a schedule we established deliberately but which has become a pattern on its own. The calls are different from the calls before the hospital. There is less performance in them. Less of the specific managed closeness of two people who are not addressing the thing underneath the closeness. She talks about the therapy in the way of someone who is doing real work and is willing to describe the work. She has not been handed the key back. That is the honest truth of where we are. The key is in my drawer and the code is the same code, and Vanessa does not have access to either. That is not a permanent decision. It is the current one. The current one will change when the pattern changes, and I will know when the pattern has changed because I have been paying attention to patterns long enough to know what they look like when they are different. Dolores and I have coffee on Saturdays now. Not every Saturday. Most of them. She brings the dog and the dog has learned to sit under the table with specific dignity, and we drink coffee and she tells me things about the neighborhood that I did not know and I tell her things about my week, and it is the specific ordinary texture of a friendship that was built in a strange way and has turned out to be one of the more reliable things in my current life. Marcus came for dinner last month. He brought wine and stayed 3 hours, and at some point during the evening Noah climbed onto the couch next to him and fell asleep against his arm, and Marcus sat completely still for 40 minutes rather than move and wake him, and I watched from across the room, and I thought about the 40-minute drive at midnight and the not asking questions and the just being there. Some people show up because they love you. Some people show up because showing up is who they are. Marcus is the second kind. The second kind is rarer and more reliable, and I am paying closer attention to who in my life is the second kind than I was before the hospital floor. Mia asked me once, about 2 months after I came home, whether I had been scared on the floor. She knew the outline of what had happened. Not the details, not the midnight calls or Vanessa or the key in the drawer. The outline. That her mother had gotten sick and gone to the hospital and come home and was taking better care of her heart. I thought about how to answer honestly in the way that 8-year-olds deserve honest answers. Yes, I said. I was scared. Of dying, she said. Of not being here, I said. Which is a different version of the same thing. She thought about that. Is that why you and Zara are friends now? I looked at her. At the specific perception of an 8-year-old who notices the shape of things. Partly, I said. Because she was there, Mia said. Because she was there, I said. Here is what I want to say to anyone who has been making payments in silence for years. The financial kind or the emotional kind or the specific kind where you give something significant, and do not name it because naming it would change what you are to each other. Name it. Not as an accusation. As a fact that deserves to exist above ground where both people can see it. The silence you choose to protect something often becomes the weight that crushes it. 3 years of unnamed payments built a wall of guilt that my sister could not see past at midnight, and the midnight was the consequence not of the payments but of the silence around them. Say the thing. Have the formal conversation. Let it be witnessed on paper. The paper is not cold. The paper is the thing that holds the shape of what is real when feelings are too heavy to hold it themselves. And then look at who showed up. Not who said they would. Not who had the key and the code and the 14 minutes. Who drove 40 minutes in the dark without being asked twice. Who sat in the hallway outside your children's rooms with a downloaded movie until morning. Who knocked on your door at midnight because the light was on at an unusual angle. Those people are not always the ones with the history. Sometimes they are the neighbor. Sometimes they are the friend with a 40-minute drive. Sometimes they are 73 years old with a dog who needs walking at midnight. But they are yours. And they showed up. And the showing up is the whole thing. It is the only thing. In the end. It is the only thing that counts.